Hello, my name is Roger Rudenstein. I'm a composer and also a social commentator. I have a podcast on Substack, more about which later. And today's broadcast is about the CIA and how the CIA ruined classical music. The CIA emerged from an organization called the OSS, which was formed during World War II and whose purpose was to help the U.S. win the war against Nazi Germany. The OSS did spying and assassinations and other kinds of things to aid the war effort. However, after the war was over, the OSS became the Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA. And the purpose of the CIA was to destroy the Soviet Union and to destroy communism, and to do it by any means necessary. It was an organization of the deep state in that it was not accountable to Congress and was not transparent either in terms of what it was doing. And the CIA continued to do this kind of stuff that it did during World War II, but this time against the Soviet Union and against labor leaders that it didn't like. And it overthrew governments all around the world. It also assassinated communists, leftists, and even nationalist leaders who it did not like. This whole thing finally came out by the Church Committee in the 70s, which was a congressional committee that exposed a lot of the CIA's skullduggery. However, there were no repercussions. The CIA wasn't dissolved. Nobody went to jail. Does that sound familiar? I'm going to discuss here today the CIA's actions on the cultural front. The CIA launched an offensive against the Soviet Union because they saw a vulnerability. That is, that the Soviet Union, while pretending to be this workers' paradise and place of culture, in fact was persecuting artists who didn't toe Stalin's line. And if they deviated in some way, or they just ran afoul of some bureaucrat or Stalin himself, who was very involved in this kind of thing, they could be executed or sent to a gulag where they would die from hard work. So this was the kind of thing that was going on. And to take advantage of that, the CIA formed a Congress of Cultural Freedom in order to draw in members of the intellectual type. Many famous artists were associated with it. And these were artists, literary figures, and musicians, composers. And they counterposed the freedom that they had to the ones in the Soviet Union. However, they went further than that. They actually got involved in the current movements in art and music. And for instance, they made a big deal about abstract art. They gave a lot of money and publicity to abstract artists because, for one thing, they couldn't challenge the status quo. At least it was unclear from the abstractions that they produced what the hell they meant by it. Some of them were very left-leaning and made public statements that certainly were not ambiguous. But the CIA didn't really care about that because, again, their purpose was to show the so-called freedom of expression and contrast it to what was going on in the Soviet Union. In the field of music, they actually backed the serialists, who were the atonalists. These are people whose music sounds like fingers on a chalkboard. I don't know if you've heard any of it. It's not very fashionable today. It's totally out of fashion today. But in the 50s and 60s, it was the reigning art form for music. And it got all the money from the foundations, and the CIA poured money into it and gave it a great deal of publicity. And they held, for instance, two big important concerts in Europe in which they invited atonal serialists from all over the world, including Igor Stravinsky, a great composer who unfortunately decided to adopt that style in his older age. And they got a concert that was pretty much all serialist music. And they were making a statement with that, and that was not unnoticed. But today, that stuff has pretty much gone away. But it took quite a while. And its effect is we're still seeing the effect today, because what it did, it had the effect of destroying any confidence that people had in modern classical music. So people who love classical music are still, to this day, most of them stuck in the 19th century or very early 20th century. And they stop at what we would consider modern classical music that's where they stop. And for good reason. Who the hell wants to hear it? I don't like it, and I can't stand it. And I'm sure most people can't. But classical music got tarred by that brush, you might say, and it still to this day hasn't recovered. And even though today we hear a lot more tonal music, especially in movies by modern classical composers, there's still a tendency to make it unpleasant along the lines of the effects of serialism, even though it's not serialist music. It's weird. Like if it's a cello, to distort the cello, like in Nomadland. I have several podcasts on this on substack.com. So that's the end of this segment. Be safe. Hope to see you the next time. And we'll end with a little bit of my music. Take care.